Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second for the discussion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Mary, you wanna give us a little, we'll start with item B?
Item 5B is the request for land use plan amendment by Capri. Up on the screen, you'll see a copy of the village's current land use plan. Everything that's shown here in blue is currently designated by land use as institutional. And like I said earlier, there was a pre-existing institutional use in this location: a church, a school, and a cemetery. And it's my belief that the institutional designation was attached to, in deference to the existing land use that was there. Beginning down on West Wisconsin Avenue, these two parcels, they aren't actually individual parcels of land, these two yellow blocks. They are contiguous part of this larger parcel right here. They are still designated in terms of land use as residential, low-density residential. They are, however, zoned institutional, and that'll come up later in the zoning question. It's my feeling that this may have been a simple mapping error, because these parcels, as far back as I can see on the air photos from Waukesha County for many, many years, I don't see any other use except open space on these two rectangles. So this is all a contiguous part of this larger parcel. These two pieces are currently designated residential. They are zoned institutional. Zoning is supposed to be consistent with land use designation. So we have an existing inconsistency there that should be cleaned up. And it's the commission's decision, but it would seem appropriate, since this is all part of the ownership of the Queen of Apostles property, that those would be transitioned from the land use residential to the land use institutional. These two parcels up on Evergreen Lane currently have one dwelling unit constructed that sits over the lot line of the two individual parcels. That dwelling has been used for rectory purposes attendant to the Queen of Apostles ownership. They do own each of these two parcels, but it's not used for an institutional purpose. It is used for a residential purpose. These two parcels up along High Street, this slice right here, the northerly slice, is actually a contiguous part of this larger lot, which is zoned single-family residential. Why the institutional was carried up and applied onto the existing residential use is unclear. It could again be a mapping error. In any case, we should have zoning, or we should have land use that's consistent with zoning. So it would seem appropriate that lot in its entirety should be one thing or the other, and zoning should track with it. This backward 7 is a contiguous part of the ownership by Queen of Apostles. It is a part and parcel of this larger blue parcel. It would appear that at one time it was part of the ownership of this lot and this lot, and may have been quit-claimed off in ownership to Queen of Apostles, but the zoning and the land use never needed to be updated because their intention was not to do anything with it. It's just open space, but it is part of their ownership. So the question you're being asked tonight with respect to land use is again that first step in the two-part process. The land use question is one of looking at the contemporary environment surrounding these 4 parcels for certain, and the 2 down in front, I guess, for that matter as well. But looking at those in their contemporary surroundings and asking yourself, do these seem like locations where institutional use should be encouraged to grow out and into? Or do they seem like areas where residential use, which is what the land use designation currently is the appropriate use for that real estate? That it's contiguous to another larger, or that it's part of a larger parcel, doesn't matter. Land use and zoning can vary within an individual parcel, just so you're aware of that. So here we have existing single-family residential surrounding those parcels, including on this blue sliver here. And you have the institutional use of the school and part of the cemetery, or not the cemetery, just the school on this particular area. Where these two parcels are concerned, again, you've got single-family residential homes ringing this on the south and the east sides, and then you've got the cemetery use immediately to the west. And the two down in front, again, single-family residential, surrounds them. They are an existing part of that larger parcel. Why they were ever exempted from that institutional designation to begin with isn't really clear for me. So the initial step that you need to consider is whether you think these satellite parcels are appropriately designated as residential as they currently stand, or whether you feel, knowing that there is a larger project out there that would like to develop the site, including these satellite pieces, and you know that because you've had a consultation on the project and you've heard a lot about the project. What does it involve? Its intensity, as we speak about it generically, is about 121 independent living units, 26 duplex units, 26 individual living apartments, 26 memory care units. So you're talking about roughly 199 beds, 199 units, 201 beds. Those are the numbers in the initial application. That, I say those things only because that gives you a sense of the intensity of the use. And the last time the commission met and talked about this issue, the question came back, what do we know about the capacity of our infrastructure to even support a use like that? Yes, that's housing for the elderly is a use that's permitted within the institutional zoning classification by conditional use. But can that use at a certain level of intensity, like we're talking about here, actually be supported by the infrastructure? So to that end, for tonight's meeting, in time for tonight's meeting, studies were done about the water, the sanitary sewer, the traffic and the road capacities, and the stormwater. Tim is here to talk about the details of those reports, analysis that were done. Pat Hawley is here to talk about traffic-related issues. I'm going to turn it over to the commission to start your discussion on the question of land use designation. And these guys can also give you a summary of the infrastructure issues if you'd like.
Okay, before we start though, Tarantino has asked to do a 10 to 15 minute presentation before we get involved in the next three items discussed with the mayor. I mean, not the mayor, sorry. Our attorney, and he is okay with that. I'm hoping the planning commission is okay with that. So with that, if everybody's okay, it looks like everybody's nodding. For the presentation. Yeah, I think we better.
Where do you guys want?
We're going to go down there. We're going to go down there and see
Okay,
it.
I have a hard copy of what's being presented in case people want a copy to write on.
Yeah.
Thank you. Where do you want us to meet? Over here? Over here?
Good evening, and my thanks to the commission for allowing us to present a very kind of high-level outline of our proposed development. With me is Kathy Gutenkunst. Kathy is assisting us in the presentation as our legal counsel. And Amy Shaneman is operating the graphics, so thank you. Before you is an aerial view of our proposed reuse and repurposing of the St. Mary's Church. I would draw your attention to a couple things. One is our interest in the site came after a number of long discussions with Queen of Apostles as to what is the best approach for development. In the consultation phase, you may have recalled that we were concerned about whether we were able to repurpose the church. Obviously, we have a plan that does that. The reason one of the reasons we were drawn to the site was the underlying zoning of the site, that it is appropriate for the use that we are proposing. And so we moved forward along with early consultation with the Planning Commission. One other point I should make about the site is we look at locations in Waukesha County. We were particularly pleased with the walkability aspect of this location. We believe that people living here will enjoy all of the services and amenities that are in the downtown area and are able to walk to them. And a number of our folks, our employees and residents do use those amenities, and I understand some of the traffic issues. This is a St. Rita Square development that was referenced earlier. The reason we've shown this is we're in the process presently of building a new Catholic church on the east side, north downtown. And it's in the image of the original Our Lady of Pompeii church, which was the Italian church in the community. If you could go to the next slide, please. Presently, we're under construction with Grace Commons. It's in Menominee Falls. It's on the site adjacent to Grace Lutheran Church. If you're familiar on County Line Road, the reason we reference this, one, construction quality, but also secondly, as people are inquiring to live at Grace Commons, we are getting a number of people that have an interest and are inquiring about living in at the spire at Pewaukee Lake. In fact, so much so that we have about half of the duplexes that are proposed, people that are interested in those units. I just want to give you a snapshot. There's been some reference to are we saturated and do we have enough senior living units. I appreciate the numbers, however, but in order to understand the marketplace, you need to break those down into unit types. But this just gives you a snapshot of the demographics. I want to draw you to this statistic at the bottom. The forecast, and which is actually happening now, of the age 65 plus population in Waukesha County is scheduled to double. And that is happening through 2025. And as you look at longer life expectancy and look at the statistics in terms of how many seniors are coming into the market, there's significant numbers that we haven't seen in the past. And looking at the population that is in Pewaukee presently, I believe the last statistic I saw from the 2010 census is that over 40% of the residents here are over the age of 55. Next. If I could turn it over to Kathy.
Thank you, Jim. Get this back, baby. I'm Kathy Greenhouse, as Jim noted. I just want to point out that I appreciate change's heart. I grew up at Woolies. I had onion rings at the Lake Air. I went to Bernie's Tap for the Big Oaf. I get it, but change is coming. And the reason we know that is if you look at your present zoning map. How do I use this, Jim? Just push? Okay. If you look at the present zoning map that Mary touched on earlier, you'll note that the property under contract is the property in the red, which goes along these black borders here. The reason I want to point this out is there's been a lot of misinformation being disseminated by a number of people. Capri does not have under contract the cemetery. Never has, never will. It is not using the cemetery for green space or open space. It's important to know that, and that's why we've outlined it in red tonight. Zoning is the action step, as Mary noted earlier. This is the use that can be provided there now. Institutional zoning, and as Mary said earlier, the use which we propose is allowed under that zoning classification. The second map to the right is the other map that Mary touched on earlier, and I won't go into this with great detail, but the things that are important for everyone in the Plan Commission especially to understand is that under the current zoning, 14.88 acres are zoned for institutional, for the use that's proposed. If the rezoning and the land use map change is approved, we go to we go to the full 16.48, but we still have 14 acres of land use that's allowed for this elderly zoning. Next slide, thank you. Now, there's a couple things going on. We have one plan that's submitted tonight, and there's a lot of questions being asked by people. How come there's not more detail? How come this? How come that? And you're absolutely right to ask those questions. But the way the process is set up by the village is you come in for a conceptual plan, which was done earlier this spring, and you submit your plans. Our general plans, our infrastructure plans, were submitted on May 22nd. We've been getting feedback from staff as recently as I think 10 days ago. So as the process goes on and approvals are given step by step, more detailed plans are given and more insight is provided back to developers. That's just how it works. So we go to the plan that we have before you right now. This is the plan that is before the commission, if I may, in terms of the land use and the rezone. This plan originally did not have, I don't know if I lost my pointer here, did not have this section here. This is the repurposed church that Mr. Tarantino referred to in the very beginning remarks. That originally wasn't on that plan, but there was a meeting with the neighborhood at the library, and it was very apparent that the neighborhood wanted St. Mary's to be saved in some fashion. So as you noted by the speaker this evening, as well as Mr. Tarantino, he's done that before. St. Rita's is one example of that. So they went back to the drawing board, and they repurposed the church in a meditation area, which could be used for prayer services and things of that nature. Before we touch on this, one thing I want to say that's been really kind of disheartening to me as a longtime resident of this area is, as I pick up the paper every week, I read remarks by people that have prejudged our plan. They're already not going to vote yes because they prejudged it. And I'm asking the commission tonight to listen and hear what we're saying based on the facts that you're being given. Because as I said, there's been a number of things in the paper that's not been accurate. So, Amy, you want to go to the next slide? There was an article on the internet, or actually an article in the Lake Country, actually it was a Freeman now, Kelly, isn't it? Where a woman was quoted as saying that she's hopeful that tonight Capri gets turned down. because then this entire project's gonna go away. That's not gonna happen. And let me tell you why that's not gonna happen. This is the current zoning map. Mary touched on it earlier. Can we go to the next slide? Under the current zoning map, this project can happen. It doesn't need a rezone, it doesn't need a land use amendment. But if without the land use amendment, we aren't able to do the same things that were intended to be done by Mr. Tarantino and his group. Some things to really know that are important. To conform to the zoning that presently exists, the project will lose 3 cottages up here. Not the end of the world. To conform to the zoning, the buildings, which I heard earlier, people don't like 4 stories, the code calls for a 42-foot maximum height in the IPS zoning. Those structures can be reconfigured and they will meet the 3-story height, the 42 feet. We will also meet the 30% floor area ratio, which is required by the IPS zone. The one thing that can't happen, if we don't get the rezone and we don't get the land use amendment, is there is no place to repurpose the church. Because that property right there, as Mary pointed out earlier, is the rectory property, and it has zoned residential. So under the residential zoning, we will not be permitted under the current zoning code to repurpose the church and keep it here. Now that's not to say the church is just going to be bulldozed over and forgotten. That's not the way Mr. Tarantino works. Important parts of that church are going to be repurposed throughout the site. And as one of the gentlemen spoke tonight, that's what's happening with St. Rita's. Similar, exactly type thing is going on there. The reason I asked Jim's staff to put this chart in, because I think it's really critical for the Planning Commission to understand what's before you. And I'm going to start on the right. If the plan is modified, which it can be, there will be 160 approximate total units. The building size will meet the 3-story, 42-foot maximum requirements. The floor area ratio will be met at 30%. The St. Mary's Church will not be repurposed because there won't be a lot to put it on, because the rectory is residential. The cemetery, and I'm going to say it one more time, the cemetery will stay as is. It will be there in perpetuity. That will not change. But the improvements that Mr. Tarantino would like to do, those can't happen because there isn't room. The infrastructure that's been identified, and I assume will be discussed further by Mr. Barbeau and his associate from R.A. Smith, that has to be addressed either way. So that's going to get done. The traffic study from Taddy and the village consultant will be discussed. It appeared to say low impact. The current property tax is exempt. It just does not generate a dime for the village of Pewaukee. If this property is allowed to be developed, it will pay an annual revenue tax. And we've estimated this based on your current tax rate. And there was a statement made by the woman who said the cemetery was part of the green space, which was not truthful, that there would be no taxes paid. In order to ensure that taxes will be paid, Mr. Tarantino's organization will enter into a development agreement. Mr. Blum drafts those all the time. And that development agreement will include a provision that real estate taxes will be continued to be paid by this development, regardless of whether it remains owned by Capri Communities or is put into some other entity. And that development agreement, I suspect, will be recorded against the property, and it will be an obligation going forward. I appreciate, and Mr. Tarantino is going to wrap this up, I appreciate this is a hard decision. I get that. I sit on Mr. Blum's side of the table as often as I stand out here. But all of you were put here to make a really hard decision. And this property has sat for a long time. So we're hopeful that you will see that with the rezoning request, we can do much more than we can without it.
Thank you, Kathy. If I could just touch on a couple more points, if you could go to the next slide. the existing St. Mary's Church. On the left is a picture of the existing church, and on the right is the repurposed portion of the church. Our plan is to take the front portion of the church and move that back to the residential lot that Kathy had referred to. And then use portions of the exterior walls of the church to frame and formulate the meditation and contemplation garden. One thing at one point though, is you notice the stark difference between the two pictures. I think somebody stated incorrectly that the new repurposed church was going to be new materials. The existing church is in disrepair and does need investment. One just needs to stand on the ground and look at the top of the steeple, look at the shingles. I think there was a front page article about the backs that's because all the softening around the church is rotten. And it needs a significant amount of investment. If we could go to the next one. These are two views. This on the right shows you the position of where the meditation contemplation garden is planned. The top view again is a repeat of what you've seen previously with the backdrop of our development. And the lower left is what we envision as the interior of the contemplation garden. And the idea, basically, I've been out at the site several times where I've seen people just pull up. They really don't have a place to access the cemetery presently. There's really no convenient place to park. And this would formalize an entry point for those when there's services at the cemetery. It's a gathering spot for that and open to the public. You can go to the next, I think. And this again is the aerial view that's looking towards the cemetery as to how it's positioned, surrounded by our development. One thing I'd point to is if you look into the foreground, there are buildings of similar type and stature in this area of the village. But the point of the aerial is to show the reuse of the church. As we looked at that and contemplated what was the best strategy, we felt this was the best strategy. Because the church was built for a purpose of causing people to come together, to be in peace and prayer. And by building this, admittedly, it's different. There aren't many examples of this, but it allows the public, the space to be open to the public, where it isn't now, is not now. Thank you. If anybody has any questions, any commissioners, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you for allowing us to do that.
Where's Washington Wisconsin Avenue view? Yep, that's the last meeting. Where's Wisconsin Avenue?
It's only part of it.
That's Wisconsin Avenue view.
Okay, folks, this is not interactive at this point. This is the presentation they've chosen to make. We'll take that information into consideration along with everything you said tonight. But now we're going to move on, and these people are going to deliberate what's been said.
Okay, before we continue, I'm going to read into the minutes. Item B, review, discussion, and possible recommendation to the village board on the request for land use plan amendment to change 6 unique land areas within the Queen of Apostles congregation continued ownership at and adjacent to 449 West Wisconsin Avenue, i.e. all or portions of Village of Pewaukee tax parcels number 0893923, 0893989, 0893056, 0893057, and a portion of the Newman property located at 463 High Street, i.e. Village of Pewaukee tax parcel numbers 0893990 from current single-family residential designation to institutional designation. Applicant is Tarantino and Company and CO Wayne Werzema. The property owners are Queen of Apostles Congregation and Robert and Gloria Newman. The properties are currently zoned IPS institutional and public service district as to the areas within parcels PWV 0893923 and R5 single-family residential as to all the other areas. Kim, would you like to go with you now?
All right. So we had an opportunity to evaluate several of the infrastructure items. I'll just discuss the sanitary sewer item first. I made some assumptions in regards to the capacities or the amount of residents that would be in each type of housing unit. They did, the applicant did respond to those, and mine might be a little bit higher than what their averages are. So my numbers might have been a little bit conservative, but I tend to want to be a little bit conservative when we're talking about sanitary sewer capacity on that. Some of the conclusions that were made is that from the additional information we received from the applicant was that the existing flows from the church and the school actually went towards West Wisconsin Avenue. The proposed flows are going to go towards Quinlan and then, to Quinlan and then up to the north and west. And then it actually flows back towards the east when you get up further to the north. But we looked at not only the size of the pipes coming out of this development directly adjacent to the development, but we extended as until we felt that we had evaluated far enough downstream on that. Specifically, there's some pipes that